All right. Hi, gang. It's me, Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and this is Thursday, the 30th day of July. I'm just gonna come into my Facebook app and share the feed onto my regular feed, and then I'll be with you. So, um, where am I sharing it to? Hold on. Write a post, share, share to. That's good enough. I hope you're having a great day, a great week, a great month, whatever measure of time is suited. A great eon, millennium, a great instant. I don't care. I hope things are going great for you right now. And I am here today to talk about a couple of different issues. First off, there's been a raging debate going on in the podcasting community, not strictly a legal debate, but one of semantics and definitions and terminology, and we lawyers love those things. So I thought I would weigh in a little bit on that as well. It's the question of whether or not a platform exclusive show, like something that is only available on Spotify or on one of the other platforms, is still legitimately called a podcast. The next thing I'm going to talk about is whether or not it is legal for a host to charge guests to appear on his or her show, whether that's legal and ethical, and I'll outline some of the my thinking as a lawyer around this issue as well. And I also have another example in my mind now of why you need a podcast prenup for your show. And then I'll take all your questions and answers. So I'll take your questions and try to give you answers. So stick around, and I'll be back with you in a few seconds here on the Podcast Lawyer Speaks. So there's the question: is a platform exclusive program still, technically speaking, a podcast? I'd love to know what you guys think. So if you're watching live, I'd love to have a comment. Share your comments in the comments pane of the live if you're watching live. If you're listening in later or watching on YouTube, go ahead and send us an email or drop a note in the comments on whatever platform you're listening to. Um, I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer, and you can find me at firemark.com or thepodcastlawyer.com. And I am here to help creative professionals, folks like you, to realize your dreams, achieve everything that you want to do more, better, faster, get it done, and have a more fulfilling and satisfying experience with what you're doing. So, is a platform exclusive still a podcast? That's the question that was posed in. Actually, it was raised as a point of contention. Somebody, one of my friends in one of the podcast groups, said, "I really hate it when," or something along those lines, and people get upset because this is no longer a podcast. And I think they were talking about, in this instance, I think it was someone like Joe Rogan, who has now signed I think it was I don't remember how many $100 million deal with Spotify, that his show is going to be exclusive on the Spotify platform. And that takes it out of the historical originating definition of what a podcast is. Sorry, I have to adjust my camera because it's tilted down a little too far. Still down a little too far. Let's go up there. All right. So, it's no longer available on an RSS feed for anybody out there to just point their device at and subscribe. And so now, if you want to listen to one of these platform specific shows, you've got to use that platform in order to read, listen, consume that podcast. And so the purists out there, many of whom are some of the early days pioneers of podcasting, take the view that that's not a podcast. Now it's just a show on a channel. And the other side is saying, hey, I don't care what you call it. It's a podcast. He's a podcaster. He's creating content in a certain way and methodology. And why shouldn't we call that a podcast? Well, to that I say, why shouldn't we call it radio? There are some fundamental differences between radio and what we do as podcasters, but at the essence, we're making recordings of our voices and sometimes our pictures. So maybe it's television. We're making these recordings and we're distributing them to the public through a technical channel. So if you get generic enough, the definition of anything will work and it'll accommodate things. So again, share with me and let me know what you think. Melanie says, "Oh, I'll need to catch you later." Sorry, I missed you, Melanie. But I'd love to hear everybody out there who's got thoughts on this. Is it a podcast? What do you think? Why do you care? Um, so I made a few notes here. I'm just going to read it. Historically, podcast means an RSS feed. Does that have to mean that it's public? Well, no. There are technical ways to make an RSS feed private behind a paywall, right? So we're not talking about the fact that it's just publicly accessible. We could have a podcast delivered with an RSS feed and still not accessible to the general public. You'd have to have a membership, or you'd have to have a password, or something like that. Could an RSS feed behind that still be considered a podcast? I think yes, it could. So isn't really podcast more about the content and the medium than about the distribution method? And why does it even really matter? Well, I'm going to talk about what they're for in a second, but what I'm seeing in these groups is people arguing over the word when it really doesn't have an impact on whether audiences care. The fact of it is, most audiences, those of us that aren't, dyed in the wool podcasters, uh, most audiences don't give one little bit of care about how it's transmitted or whatever else. They want to listen to Joe Rogan, they go over to Spotify, they get the Spotify app and they listen. I personally would prefer to have everything in all of my media consumption in one app, so I don't have to change from. I use Overcast. I don't have to change from Overcast to Spotify just so I can hear that show. And in fact, as a practical matter, I don't change over to the Spotify app. I continue to listen to the things in my Overcast app. I've got plenty of content there to choose from, and I don't generally get to another point source. And so switching apps is a friction point for me. That's the downside of being exclusive. If your show is going to be exclusive on a platform, that's the downside that you're confronted with. Some of your listeners may just never come back and find you because they're not changing apps or changing their tools. No, there are those that would argue, well, that's like saying to someone with a television program, well, I don't want to pick up the remote and change my TV station, so I'm going to watch what's on NBC tonight. Yeah, your show's on CBS. Too bad. I'm not going to watch it. So we have to make it so easy that it doesn't matter. And I think it's pretty easy now. I mean, you tap a button on your phone, or if you're in the car, on your CarPlay app or whatever in the car, right? So we're getting to a point where I don't think it matters. It's a semantic discussion. Now, the truth of it is, what we are doing is creating bait. I'll say it again. We are creating bait. As content creators, what we do is make bait. If you are creating a show and you're on an RSS feed and you're trying to monetize your show using advertisers, the show is the bait to get the listeners to come and pay attention to your message, so you can feed them the ads that your sponsors are paying you to present. You're selling those audience members to your sponsors. That's the business model, right? That's a sponsored business model. There's lots of other business models, don't get me wrong, but this is the one that most of us think about. If you're selling ads, if you're running ads in your podcast, you want the biggest audience possible so you can charge as much as possible for your ads. Well, if you are a private platform exclusive program, you're creating bait to attract an audience to use the platform, either by subscription or by adopting the platform and using it and using its app. Because guess what they're going to do in the app? They're going to feed ads, or they're going to try to promote an upsell to a subscription, right? If the platform feels that it can attract enough of an audience by providing these exclusives, then hey, more power to them. But they are limiting the audience and discoverability. So some people just aren't going to tune into that platform because it's a different platform. They've got to go somewhere else to get their stuff. Others will stay on the platform because it's easy and painless. So it works both ways. So maybe it's time to take another look at this nomenclature. Podcast, the term podcast was scorned initially by many because people were afraid that it would suggest to audiences that you could only listen to a podcast on an iPod, excuse me. Oh, or well, that just didn't prove to be true. And now who listens on an iPod? I guess some of us do when we work out. We have those little ones or whatever. But that seems to have been overcome. So I remember Leo Laporte was talking about maybe we should call it a netcast or something like that didn't have any particular brand association with it. And I liked what he had to say, but it just didn't carry. It didn't fly. And a lot of people were, you know, making those kinds of suggestions and objections to the use of pod. And then people came up and said, well, it's portable on demand, podcast. So maybe that's the thing. And, should we care about RSS feed? Probably not. So should Spotify call its exclusives something different? Maybe they should. I mean, there could be something to be said for Spotify developing its own, maybe it's called a Spotcast or something like that. Now you're actually helping brand it as a Spotify exclusive. And it's the same thing content wise, but it's a Spotcast or a Spotify exclusive program, like the HBO original movie or something like that. Does it really hurt independent content creators, podcasters, if those platforms exclusives share the same name? I don't know. Does it hurt traditional television that Netflix shows are still called television shows and they're eligible for the Emmy Award? Well, traditional television seems to think so a little bit. But the fact of it is the consumer is watching or consuming that content the same way they consume other like content, similar content. So you sit down in front of the TV to watch Netflix. You don't sit down in front of the net box to watch television, to watch Netflix, and the television to watch television. It's all the same thing, right? Yeah, we watch our Netflix on our tablets and our phones and things too, but we watch our television that way too now, right? So really, isn't this just a natural evolution of market and technology? I would love to know what you think if you're watching right now. I see there's a handful of people watching. I'd love to hear your opinions. Drop a note in the comments and let me know. And before I wrap up the conversation about whether or not it's a still a podcast, I think the answer is it is, and we're sort of this is what we're dealing with. We've got these things that we're calling podcasts, but really, what is it? It's an on-demand consumable media presentation, right? Okay. So enough about the semantics and the wordplay around that. Let's talk about pay-to-play podcasting. Is it legal and or ethical for a podcast host to charge guests to appear on their shows? This again, raging debate in some of the podcast forums on Facebook. I've been noticing. Now, apparently, some of the bigger names in podcasting actually do this, and some teach others to do this. I'm not going to call anybody out or name names, partly because what I'm about to say is going to suggest that maybe what they're doing isn't entirely and strictly legal. I haven't listened to those shows, so I don't know if they're in compliance with the regulations and things I'm going to talk about. But really, is it okay to charge guests to come on your show? Well, look, if the guests are willing to pay and you've got an audience they want to reach, then sure, why not? It's just a sponsored message, right? Isn't it just program length advertising? That's been around for decades, program length advertisement. In fact, when I was not a kid, when I was a teenager and a college kid, there were TV shows, cartoon shows on the air that were all, for 30 minutes of this cartoon adventure show, it was all about selling products. I'm thinking about, G.I. Joe. Well, of course, you're going to sell G.I. Joe toys, right? Program length advertisement. But the real, where the term program length ad came from is really the infomercial, right? Now, here, what you have is the brand or the product paying for the airtime on television or on cable and buying a whole 30-minute block, and they would present a program where a host or someone would come on and introduce their guest who would come on and talk about how amazing this product. Let me show you how OxyClean will get your dirtiest laundry cleaner than it's ever been. Let me show you how Kaboom is a great cleaning product. Let me show you how the the Ronco rotisserie oven will cook chicken more healthfully and faster than you've ever seen before. These things were and are infomercials. They're it's a 30 or a 60-minute long program, all designed with one thing: get that sales message, that marketing message out. So why shouldn't we allow podcast hosts to sell their airtime to willing customers? I've got a book to sell. I want to promote my book. I want to promote my product. I want to advance my candidacy for public office, whatever it is. Why shouldn't a podcast host who's willing to sell it to me, why shouldn't I be able to buy that time from them and access their audience if they're willing to do it, right? So look, a couple of things that come into play here. Like, if the market will bear that kind of a payment scheme, then I say why not? But here are some rules that I think we have to follow. And I'm not making this up. I'm interpreting some rules that apply in other areas, but I think that by analogy they do apply, and it wouldn't surprise me at all to see some enforcement in this area. So first, you've got a legal contract, excuse me, a legal contract between the host and the guest. And so that contract needs to sort of handle the issues of who's in charge, who's in control, who owns what. Does one party or the other have certain approval rights? Can the host edit the show? Can the guest get the show taken down later on? Who owns the episode? Hey, I paid for it, so it's mine, right? Well, wait a minute, it's my podcast. I'm the host of this every week. No, I own that. What if I want to do something else with it? What if the guest 2 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks after we have the recording is involved in some crazy kind of scandal, and now I've got that guest's paid message in my feed? Should I be able to take it down? Do I owe the guest any money back? Those kinds of things. So you have to have a contract that addresses some of these things, specifically the moral, ethical, and social justice kinds of issues that might come up. But there are also some legal regulations and laws that apply. Basically, it's false advertisement and endorsement issues. The FTC, the Fair Trade Commission, is the United States government's consumer protection agency. They are tasked um, uh, preventing consumers from being harmed by false and misleading advertising. So, is a podcast guest appearance advertising? Well, if somebody's paying to be on your show because they want to promote their book, their product, their services, or whatever their message is, then yeah, I say that's an advertisement. They're selling something. It may not be an overt sale, a commercial transaction that they're proposing, but hey, vote for me. Vote on this issue. I want you to believe this, this, and this. This is what you should do. I think that if the guest is paying for that, then yeah, it's a paid ad, and the audience has a right to know that. The law, under the Fair Trade Commission's regulations, prohibits false or misleading advertisement. And so if the guest appearance is an ad, then yes, it's a marketing tool. It's designed to get a message in front of an audience, to induce some kind of an action or reliance or whatever. Even if it's just, hey, I want you to know me, like me, trust me, buy my stuff, accept my point of view, vote for me, whatever. So isn't a podcast appearance also an endorsement by the host of the guest? Doesn't having a guest come on my show and talk to me, and by extension my audience, doesn't that amount to me giving that guest, some stamp of legitimacy because I'm having them on my show? Isn't that an endorsement? And am I not supporting? So if I agree with them, great, I should say so. If I disagree with them, then am I not deceiving my audience by accepting their money to have them come on the show? Unless they're paying me to come on and be disagreed with, which I don't think really happens much. So isn't an appearance that promotes a product or point of view essentially an ad? Isn't it something where the audience should know? The FTC rules require, if you were doing an affiliate ad in your podcast, say you're promoting a book or a product that you can buy through an affiliate link, the law requires you have to disclose, I'm giving you an affiliate link. If you use this, I'm going to get some money. If you're doing a review of a product and they sent you the product for free, the law requires you say, hey, they sent this to me for free and I don't have to return it. I'm going to give you my official opinion. If you do have to return it, you say so, right? If there's a financial relationship or some kind of a beneficial relationship involved, I think you have to share the nature of that relationship. Full disclosure of all financial and beneficial relationships between endorsers and the products or people or services that they endorse. And it has to be true. You can't, you can't mislead. It can't be false. It has to be unambiguous. I got paid because they want me to talk about this product. I got paid because John is coming on the show today. You got to be that obvious and clear. John has paid for an opportunity to speak to you today. Here's what he has to say. It has to be a clear and conspicuous disclosure. You have to do that in the same medium. So if you're doing an audio podcast, the message needs to be delivered via audio. You can't just drop it on the website, the blog post, the show notes. You have to say it in the audio. If it's a video show, you've got to put it up on screen so that audiences aren't likely to miss that disclosure. Clear and conspicuous, and it needs to be as closely adjacent to, both in time and space, to the what's the word I'm looking for, to the message, the sponsored message. So a scroll along the bottom of a video, if this is a sponsored video appearance, or the audio message might need to be repeated a few times at the beginning, end, and somewhere in the middle of an interview or something like that. Got to give clear, conspicuous, adjacent, true, unambiguous disclosure of any financial, or I'm going to say beneficial, relationship as well. If you have a guest on and that person happens to be your spouse, and your spouse is promoting a product or service, well, you're not getting paid anything, but there are some familial services. There's a beneficial relationship going on there. And I think it's important to disclose that. Hey, by the way, so-and-so is my husband or my wife. And that's why I'm here promoting the product. You have to think about it this way. If the audience would feel betrayed because they didn't know this information and they went out and bought this product based on your endorsement, based on based on this, what's the word I'm looking for? This misleading by omission about the relationship, then you should have disclosed it. So that's that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Does anybody on the call anybody watching right now do you charge your audiences for your guests for appearances on your show? Right? I mean, it's a legitimate way to monetize your show, I suppose, but I think you just have to be really above board about it. If you're not, then I think you're deceiving your audience, and the other word for that is fraud. So whether you intend to or not, that's what's going on, and I think that they have a right to know. Audiences have a right to know when you're endorsing a product or a service or a person, if you're getting a financial benefit from that endorsement. Next point I wanted to make today is, and by the way, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'll try to address them. And any comments you have, of course, I'd love to see. I'd love to know who's here and have a chat with you, but nobody's answering me today. So, all right. Well, the third thing I want to talk about is why you need a podcast prenup. What do I mean by a podcast prenup? I'm really talking about an agreement, either a co-production agreement or a collaboration agreement or a hosting agreement of some sort between the hosts, the owners of a show. Now, this came up for me today. That's why it's on my mind. Is another podcaster client of mine reached out to me and mentioned that she didn't get a co-production agreement signed with her co-host at the time they started working together. So they collaborated without an agreement to create episodes of a show, and then she tried to get the co-host or the host, I should say, to agree to treat it as a certain kind of a structure of a deal, where the host was, essentially, providing her services and being entitled to a share of the revenues, but that the main host, the alleged owner of the show, would handle everything else and would own the show. Well, in this case, this person paid for everything, took all the risks, spent a bunch of hours working on, putting in her time as a producer, putting in her time as a host and interviewer and all that, and the other person was the talent, essentially, really just showed up and did her thing on microphone at recording time. So the question now becomes, well, who owns this thing? And legally speaking, it's a really hard question to answer. I'm going to be a little circumspect here because I've got a client situation. But the way the law works is, what you sort of might think. If people get together to create something together, they own it together. If they get together to create a copyrighted work together, and its intention by everybody is that it's a single unified work, then they are what's called joint authors. And joint authors have equal rights, undivided equal rights in the work that they've created. Now, so that's the issue. But then if you're co-owners of something, aren't you responsible for sharing the costs of creating that something? So doesn't the talent side have to reimburse the production side, the producer side, for their, the fair share of all the expenses and so on? And then, she says, like, my contribution was showing up to do the recording. That's what I'm here for. And the producer is saying, well, wait a minute, I showed up and did my part too, but we had all these expenses. So should there be a reimbursement or something like that? How do we work it out? Well, now they can't monetize their show because nobody's going to touch it. It's a hot potato unless they're on the same page about who owns and is in control, right? And what happens if the show gets picked up for a TV show? That was part of the reason they created this show, was that the producer saw an opportunity for this host to become a television host or star, and this talent to become television talent, and was planning to use the podcast as sort of a proof of concept for a kind of TV show or a film or a book. And now that they're at odds with each other, if that starts to come together, one or the other of them is probably in a position to put the kibosh on the whole deal. Or not. Maybe the TV company comes along and makes a deal with one of them and the other one's left out in the cold. That's not good for either of them either. So what do you do? What now? Well, some of the options are to buy the other out. One of them could pay the other and just say, okay, you can own it, or I can own it. I'll give you money. The other is just to do nothing and hope for the best. Maybe, go forward for a little while and see what happens there. But maybe the thing to do is pull the plug. They're however many episodes into a show, but is this producer gonna put in more time and energy on a show that she doesn't feel confident that she's gonna have the rights that she thought she was gonna have, the ability to profit from it that she thought she was gonna have? If they can't monetize the thing, then pull the plug. And then they can argue about, well, does the feed stay up or does the feed come down? What do we do with this existing content? Well, buy me out, I'll give it to you. Maybe I don't know. If they'd had their agreement in place at the beginning, this wouldn't be a problem. They needed a podcaster prenup, and they didn't do it. In fact, this host had been talking to me about it. We had drafted some stuff, but they'd already gone down the path. They were already partway down. And then when they presented the document to the other, the talent said, nope, that's not what I want. I'm not going to sign that. So now we have a he said, she said about what the relationship was, about who owns what. That is the kind of thing that you want to avoid when you're starting getting into business together with people. They could be your best friend, could be your spouse, could be anybody. The spouse is a special situation because you've got other stuff in the relationship. But if you're getting into business with somebody, a good friend, especially a friend, it's important to get these things handled. Get it hammered out ahead of time, preferably before you start working together. It's possible to do it post-nup also, but better to do it sooner rather than later so that everybody's on the same page and you don't waste a lot of time and energy and investment of things to find out later that you never really had a meeting of the minds as to what the relationship is supposed to look like. That's the challenge. The fight becomes when they break up over who gets the kids, who gets the house. Well, the house is the infrastructure for the podcast, right? The title, the websites, all that stuff. And the kids, that's the subscribers. Who gets the kids? Who's responsible for making sure they get the best of life they can have? What's in their best interests? Well, in these situations, we don't have a judge that's going to take into account the best interests of your audience. So do that now. Do that at the beginning of your relationship. Get a podcaster's prenup. Reach out to me, thepodcastlawyer.com, and we'll figure out what needs to happen and get you the right format of agreement. Now, it's possible that you do intend to be equal co-owners of everything, in which case I'm going to say, well, then you need to figure out the what if. one of us decides to leave? What if one of us stops pulling their own weight? Do we have a mechanism for a buy sell or something like that? Or maybe the intention is, hey, my show, I'm going to bring you on as the host and the guest and the whatever, and you'll do these things and you'll get paid, or you'll get paid later if and when we ever make any money. That's perfectly a legitimate approach to do. All right, that's it for me. I'm not seeing any questions in the comments, and I guess I'm going to sign off in a minute. I just want to say thanks for being here, thanks for watching, and being a part of the the podcast lawyer speaks. And I'm Gordon Firemark, the podcast lawyer. I'll see you again in a week. I'm here every Thursday at 4 p.m. Live on Facebook. And I am also now making these episodes available as a podcast. And I don't have the URL set up yet. It's in the works. We're working on it. But stay tuned, and I'll look forward to seeing you again really soon. Have a great day.